a $250,000 survival competition where 10 people are dropped on a deserted island in New Zealand with only one rule: whoever lasts the longest wins. It seemed like all they had to do was endure and take home the money, but no. They quickly realized that the deep jungle was no place for daydreaming. The moment they set foot on the island, Sharaz, a former Australian soldier with a stone-cold face, confidently declared, "This is going to be easy." But just a few hours later, while excitedly tracking animal footprints, he realized that the only thing he had hunted was a pile of dry branches. Tamik, a professional sharpshooter and a strict vegetarian for the past 8 years, immediately sensed the coming disaster when she discovered deer tracks near camp. Half of her wanted to hunt, but the other half felt guilty about those adorable deer. In the end, she decided to start with fishing to get used to the taste of meat, but after an entire day, she caught absolutely nothing, only some mushrooms and deep regret for not bringing salt. Meanwhile, Mike, a 60-year-old survival expert and former pillar of the national rugby team, landed with fiery determination. He carefully set up camp, gathered firewood, but just as he was about to start a fire, an unexpected asthma attack struck. Before the show could even react, Mike collapsed, gasping for air. The rescue helicopter arrived like a superhero, but all he could whisper was, "I forgot my inhaler." And just like that, he was eliminated, becoming the first contestant to leave, leaving behind a half-boiled pot of water that no one dared to drink. Rick, 58 years old, a former Air Force Special Ops soldier, eagerly set out to find tools to build his shelter. He crafted a hammer from stone and wood, but when he tested it on the ground, the handle snapped in half. He stared blankly into space, wondering if he had just lost his dignity. Refusing to give up, Rick turned to food hunting. He spotted fresh deer tracks and felt as if he had just won the lottery. He planned a grand hunt, but before he could even start, a deep hunger pang forced him to crawl back to camp and settle for some wild leaves instead. Leanne, a wildlife conservation officer, spent 2 whole hours just finding a suitable spot for her shelter. The moment she finally found the perfect location, she realized there were more mosquitoes here than the entire show's crew combined. That first night, she curled up, wondering if risking her life was really worth $250,000. The next morning, as she stepped out to search for food, she witnessed a breathtaking sunrise so beautiful that she momentarily forgot her hunger, standing there frozen as if lost in a masterpiece painting. But the most shocking contestant was Andre, a model trainer. From the start, he declared that his ultimate survival goal was to stay handsome. But when hunger struck, he had to accept the brutal truth: good looks couldn't feed an empty stomach. He decided to hunt deer, but when he tried mimicking a deer call to lure his prey, the sound he made was so awful that even he had to cover his ears. The result? The deer ran even farther, while Andre sat down in defeat, chewing on a handful of leaves. As everyone struggled with the wilderness, Sharaz switched his strategy from hunting to fishing. He confidently cast his fishing line into the water, waiting anxiously, and then, success. A giant eel took the bait. But just as he was about to pull it in, he suddenly remembered that, according to Maori beliefs, eels are sacred guardians of the water. Torn between survival and respecting local culture, Sharaz sighed and gently released the eel back. And so, he remained hungry. Meanwhile, Tamik decided to move her shelter to a sunnier spot. But with an empty stomach, she was practically crawling on the ground as she dragged her belongings. When she finally reached her new location, she collapsed, wondering if she were a viewer instead of a contestant. Would she even bet on herself? That night, while everyone struggled to sleep, Andre faced another heartbreak. A massive deer had wandered right near his camp, but he had no idea. The next morning, when he saw the tracks, he held his head in despair, muttering, "A deer came right to me, and I let it go. I deserve to starve." Meanwhile, Susan, a tough contestant who grew up in a place without electricity or internet, treated this competition like a simple camping trip. She built her shelter and foraged for food without the slightest worry. In stark contrast was Jason, who hadn't eaten anything in 5 days but was still determined to hunt, even though at this rate, the only thing he would successfully hunt was a single blade of grass. As the survival battle entered its 6th day, everyone realized that this was not just a competition against nature, but a battle within themselves. Some missed home, some fought against hunger, and some just wanted a good night's sleep. But one thing was certain: if there were a prize for suffering the best, all 10 contestants would be worthy winners. Day 7 on the deserted island began with an unexpected event. Rick, the former Air Force Special Ops soldier, finally found a deer. He had been tracking it all morning until he was just a few meters away. His heart pounded, adrenaline surged, and he raised his homemade bow, closed his eyes for a quick prayer, and missed. The arrow shot straight into a bush, while the deer stared at him for a second as if mocking him before dashing away. Rick knelt on the ground, unsure whether to be angry or laugh, but one thing was certain: he had never missed his neighborhood barbecue place this much. Meanwhile, Andre, the man whose goal was to stay handsome in the wild, was in crisis. After a week of eating only leaves and roots, his skin had darkened, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were sunken from sleepless nights. He looked at his reflection in the crystal-clear stream and screamed in horror as he realized his good looks were fading. This can't be happening. Andre swore to find food, or at least some face wash. He stumbled off to search for wild fruit, but instead of finding fruit, he tripped and smacked his head into a fire ant nest. 3 seconds later, his scream echoed across the entire island. At the same time, Tamik, the vegetarian sharpshooter, had evolved into an entirely new creature, a woman who no longer cared about the concept of being vegetarian. After 7 days of starvation, she spotted a small fish swimming in the stream and did not hesitate. She lunged forward, scooping the water quickly, but missed. Undeterred, she crouched in wait like a starving panther until an unfortunate fish swam too slowly. Finally, she had her first meal in a week. Sitting in front of her charred, blackened fish over the fire, she felt both victorious and guilty, as if she had betrayed the entire vegetarian community. But hunger won over everything. She devoured every last bite. Leanne, the wildlife conservationist, had reached a state of zen. After a week of coexisting with mosquitoes, she had become immune to their bites. Mosquitoes. She didn't care. Ants. No problem. Hunger. Just take a deep breath. She sat on a rock, gazing at nature, letting her soul drift with the wind, until a small snake slithered across her foot. Instantly, her meditation ended. She screamed and ran for her life. Meanwhile, Sharaz, the man who once declared, "This is easy," was completely drained. After 7 days of surviving on stream water and tree leaves, he lay sprawled on the beach, staring at the sky, wondering where he had gone wrong. At that exact moment, a bird flew overhead and dropped a gift straight onto his forehead. Sharaz said nothing. He simply lay there, closed his eyes, and told himself, "The universe is testing me." Mike, the contestant eliminated on day 1 for forgetting his asthma inhaler, watched the show from the comfort of his home, eating potato chips and shaking his head. I am the luckiest man alive. Then came day 8, and finally, true disaster struck. A massive storm rolled in. Winds howled, rain poured down in sheets, and everyone had to fight to survive. Tents flew away, firewood got soaked, and the river swelled. After his embarrassing deer missing incident, Rick was now struggling to rebuild his shelter, but the wind kept tearing it apart. Andre clutched his head, lamenting, "How am I supposed to keep my hair looking good in this weather?" Tamik accepted her fate, curled up in a corner, and prayed that no trees would fall on her tent. After a terrifying night, the next morning dawned clear and bright, but the aftermath was undeniable. Many had lost their tools, their firewood was gone, and whatever little food they had managed to store was now completely wiped out. Everyone exchanged anxious glances. And that's when Rick stood up and declared, "We have to work together. If we don't, none of us will survive." His words marked a new chapter in the survival competition. No longer just individuals fighting against nature, they were now forced to cooperate, despite still competing against each other. But how long would this teamwork last? Would their survival instincts eventually turn them against one another? The journey was far from over, and that $250,000 prize still awaited the last person standing.